making the indigenous population a wonderful experimentation group.
Return to political quiet after the recent disturbances. Leopoldville engages in an all-out fight against infantile paralysis, crowding every clinic with mothers and their children, the latter to receive orally administered shots of a new vaccine against the scourge of childhood. It is a live virus preparation developed in the United States by Philadelphia's Dr. Hilary Koprowski, and it differs from our famed Salk vaccine in that it does away with injections. It must taste good if the children's receptivity to it is a criterion.
Sabin and Koprowski conducted their experiments at the same time, both using a live oral polio vaccine. No AIDS cases emerged in the USSR where Sabin did his testing, but in the Congo, where Koprowski's vaccine was used, the first AIDS case surfaced 1 year after the vaccination campaigns. Was there, as Curtis suggested, something different in Koprowski's vaccine? In 1958, Albert Sabin analyzed Koprowski's vaccine, called CHAT, and found it to be unstable, contaminated by an unknown virus, which he designated Virus X. He told Koprowski about the findings and received this response. Dear Albert, I have carefully considered your extraordinary letter of November 17th, with its even more extraordinary enclosures. I cannot imagine for a moment that I would dismiss 10 years of work by another investigator with one airy wave of an intraspinal needle. Sir, your letter of December 1st does not merit a reply. It is clear that dispassionate analysis and discourse are impossible for you. Sarcasm and invectives do not take the place of reproducible facts in science. Farewell, my one-time friend and colleague. Sabin moved quickly to make his findings public. In June 1960, his vaccine, deemed more reliable, was chosen to replace Salk's. Koprowski had lost the race. In his Rolling Stone article, Tom Curtis echoed Albert Sabin's findings. Koprowski's vaccine was contaminated with a virus. He went on to say it was a monkey virus, citing the African green monkey as the source. And there, Curtis made a major mistake. The green monkey does not carry SIV, HIV's predecessor, unlike the African chimp. This was enough to discredit Curtis's findings.
Hilary Koprowski felt that his honor had been defiled and that he had been done serious injury. The Rolling Stone folded under and publicly apologized for having published the article. And that was, as they say, that for the time being.
The story could have ended there, but one man decided there were many questions left unanswered. Edward Hooper, a British journalist, went to Africa to pursue the path of polio vaccinations. He was convinced that Koprowski used the SIV-carrying chimpanzees to make his polio vaccine. During 17 years, he interviewed hundreds of participants and observers of the period and collected thousands of relevant documents. In 1999, Hooper published the results of his research in a book of more than 1,000 pages, and once again, the scientific community was rocked.
Good evening. Could AIDS have been accidentally caused by scientists? A new book claims HIV has its origins in apes and monkeys and was passed on to humans when scientists in Africa used primate tissue in a mass vaccination campaign against polio. I'll be asking the book's author whether his allegations stand up.
AIDS came about as an act of man, not as an act of God. An experimental oral polio vaccine that was prepared, I believe, in chimpanzee kidneys and chimpanzee blood, and which was fed to over 1 million Africans in the Belgian Congo, in Rwanda and in Burundi between 1957 and 1960, correlates so precisely with the first appearances of AIDS that I think what we have here is the route whereby this chimpanzee virus arrived in humans.
The intensity of the debate and the depth of Hooper's research forced Hilary Kaprowski to respond.
The tissue which I used were kidneys obtained either monkeys from Philippines or from India, which was rhesus monkey, this is the normal term, and there are two other species, Macaca mulatta, I forgot the name of the species from Philippines. And this is documented in print.
So you never used chimpanzees to...
Oh, never in my life.
Oddly, there were no existing documents showing how Kaprowski made his chat vaccine. But archive footage from Kaprowski's chimp facility can shed some light.
Au Congo belge, le camp de polio, dirigé par le docteur Courtois, compte 86 chimpanzés sur lesquels on pratique régulièrement des essais en injectant le vaccin anti-polio inventé en 1947 par le docteur Kaprowski. Les animaux sont placés dans des cages dont une des parois est mobile et permet d'approcher plus facilement les singes pour les injections hypodermiques. Ainsi se poursuit une lutte implacable contre une des plus terribles maladies non encore vaincues.
So Kaprowski's research camp did house chimpanzees, and was in fact one of the largest chimp facilities ever created to date.
Well over 400 chimpanzees were brought to Lindy Camp in the space of less than 2 years between 1956 and 1958, and that with one or two notable exceptions, animals which were favourites, which were treated as pets, that every single one of these chimpanzees ended up dead. The question has to be, why were they killed?
Hooper found an ally for his theory. Bill Hamilton was a renowned scientist, the most important evolutionary biologist since Darwin. And Hamilton felt there was a 95% chance that this theory was correct.
Is there a possibility here scientists simply don't want to know, don't want to accept perhaps at least the moral, if not the legal liability for what has been done for the AIDS virus?
I feel that this is so, and as one of the most worrying aspects of the case, I feel it's not only the origin of AIDS that is in question here, it is the conduct of science towards this hypothesis, which has been one of almost paranoid rejection, I would say. I think I would not exaggerate to describe it as medical science's worst hated hypothesis, and there seems to be a great reluctance to publish anything about it or to test any of the available evidence that could be more directly tested.
Bill Hamilton made 2 trips to Africa to collect chimpanzee samples. Sadly, during the second trip, he contracted malaria and died in March 2000. Before his death, Hamilton had asked the Royal Society of Scientists in London, England, to stage a debate on the hunter versus the vaccine theory of the origin of AIDS. In his memory, the conference went ahead. Edward Hooper was invited to present his evidence to Kaprowski and the scientific community. It was the first time they had ever invited a non-scientist to debate a theory with renowned experts in the field.
I am not to defend myself. Hooper has to defend himself. Certainly this meeting is very welcome. I think it's a good meeting. It's an unusual meeting. That a journalist presents a hypothesis without facts, and here come the scientists and give him all the scientific facts.
I think we're going to have a real debate today. I think it's going to be a worthwhile debate. I don't think it's between Kaprowski and myself. I think it's about something far more important than that.
From the opening of the conference, arguments were launched against Hooper's theory. Even the date when AIDS emerged among men was challenged. But the final blow to Hooper was a surprise announcement that samples of Kaprowski's vaccine had been located and tested and contained no trace of HIV, SIV, or chimp DNA. That left little room for Hooper to respond.
This did offend Ed Hooper, because he was clearly the underdog at the meeting. But science is a very cruel culture. We go by evidence, and although we may be fooled in our interpretation, we may fool ourselves, in misinterpreting evidence. In the end, hard evidence wins the day.
But the scientific evidence that signaled the death knell for the polio vaccine theory needed to be re-examined. Exactly what was tested?
The actual samples that were used in the Congo between late 1957 and the beginning of 1960, of course, don't exist anymore. They were used. But one of the samples tested was the very same lot of virus as Hooper thinks is by far the most likely to have been contaminated that was used in the Congo, the chat 10A11.
Similar samples? Maybe. But the real question is, was it or was it not used in the Congo?
This was discovered here in the UK, who had received it in 1981 from the State Serum Institute in Stockholm, who in turn had received it from the Wistar Institute around the time it was made. And it was sealed and had never been opened.
So the sample remains sealed since it was made at Kaprowski's laboratory. All one can say for certain is that it was never used in the Congo. Is this enough scientific rigor to use as a decisive statement against the polio vaccine theory?
This was another event in which the scientists eventually conjoined and had a public lynching in London for the Royal Society, in which they once again claimed to have laid rest to the idea that HIV could have come from polio vaccine. And I don't think they did a better job than they had done before. There are still great gaping holes in their story.
We wanted to see for ourselves if SIV-carrying chimpanzees were used just for testing, or if their organs were used to make Kaprowski's vaccine. So we returned to the Congo, where it all took place. This is Stanleyville, Belgian Congo's former capital. On the outskirts of town lie the remains of the vast Stanleyville Medical Laboratory. In 1957, it was a sparkling new facility where Kaprowski set up his operations to produce and test his polio vaccine on the local people. Camp Lindy, which housed the chimpanzees, was built on a peninsula of the Lindy River, 40 minutes upstream from Stanleyville. To get there, we had to take the road and then a ferry to cross the river. During his research, Edward Hooper had found Christophe Bayello, one of the assistants working at Camp Lindy. Bayello agreed to guide us there. In the 1950s, he was in charge of caring for and feeding the chimpanzees.
polio na bango wana bali kusala ba operation wana biso pe tokipe na yango te oyazaki koye ba bere infirmière ndako koye ba secret wana.
What secret is Bayello talking about? In the jungle, only a few traces remain, but other images bring these abandoned sites back to life. These photographs were taken by Tom Norton, Kaprowski's right-hand man. The photos help date one of Kaprowski's trips to the Congo, February 1957. It corresponds to an event, the first big influx of chimpanzees to Camp Lindy. More than 100 chimpanzees, an exorbitant number, captured in about 15 days. An important visit, it's immortalized with a symbolic handshake between the two co-founders, Ghislain Courtois and Hilary Kaprowski. In this photo are the 11 camp assistants, including Christophe Bayello and Joseph Limbaya, one of two nurses who observed firsthand what was taking place at Lindy.
Atungaki wana mobele pona ko tusalaka tutiaka mobele banyama yango wana tuti banyama wana soko basingi yango pona ko buma yango to bumi yango nataka ko buma mokolo moko na ko buma mibale to misato nde simango nasali autopsie nakosala autopsie nakokata awa